the woman who's the cutter came with a razor and had done something down there, but I wasn't really particularly aware of what she did. I remember the pain so distinctly. We weren't sedated. The pain was excruciating. It was excruciating. I do remember crying. I do remember screaming. I didn't pass out. I was born in Chichester and I come from a Sudanese background. Interesting dynamics living as a Sudanese family in the UK. Didn't really have a lot of Sudanese people around me, not that much of a big community, but very, very in touch with our Sudanese culture. So spoke Arabic at home and would occasionally visit growing up Sudan to go see my family. None of my family, apart from my mum, my dad and my brother, actually live in England. I remember my parents saying that we're going to go to Qatar and that my whole family was going to be there. In my mind, it was just a family trip where we were seeing cousins, aunties, uncles, but I don't know how long it was into the holiday when we were doing all of the quote unquote like circumcisions. In any culture, I feel like boys tend to get treated a little bit more differently, but I would say that girls can sometimes be upheld to fulfill, a certain role, like trying to retain purity, and it's a rite of passage into womanhood that is done to suppress sexuality. I do remember everyone having it done on the same day. So it was myself, my brother, and another cousin of mine who is a girl, and 2 or 3 other boy cousins as well. And we all just kind of like went in there separately, like sort of like getting called in to a doctor's surgery. And I just remember seeing this woman who I do recall calling her a witch. Like, she did frighten me. And then you get held down, and the woman who's the cutter came with a razor and had done something down there, but I wasn't really particularly aware of what she did. I remember the pain so distinctly. We weren't sedated. There weren't any painkillers. It was just a woman with a razor and getting held down by family members. I do remember feeling super, super scared in that moment. And I remember the after pain as well, just being really brutal. But I do remember being on antibiotics afterwards just to prevent any infections. It's so crazy because everything that happened after being cursed and being held down, I don't remember, and I'm not quite sure why I don't remember, and I don't know whether it's me just trying to suppress. After that, we celebrated basically the coming of age, or like our rite of passage into womanhood, and they took pictures of us with henna and like beautiful incense that you could just smell in the room. But then upon coming back, I really had no idea what had happened, and it wasn't something I spoke about because it was not made to be a big deal, because it was just so entrenched in the cultural norms of what a woman is to go through at that age. So there are 4 types of FGM. Type 1 is where the clit gets removed. So that's what the World Health Organization will call a clitoridectomy. And then type 2 is where they will partially or totally remove the clit and partially or totally remove the labia. And then type 3 is the partial or the total removal of the clit, the partial or the total removal of the labia and surrounding areas as well. And then type 4 is when they do all of the above, and then tend to sew it up and leave just a tiny hole. And the one that happened to me was type 1, where they partially removed the clit. I was 17 when I found out what had happened was FGM. I was sat with my 2 friends at the time and my brother, and we were generally just speaking about circumcision. I don't know if that's a normal thing to do. My brother had just mentioned, oh yeah, Sarah's been circumcised. And then my friends sort of looked at me like, women don't get circumcised. So at that point, I'm still thinking that that's a normal thing that everyone goes through. And I think I was super just embarrassed and angry at my brother for mentioning it. And I remember coming home and having a few conversations with my mum, like, you know, what the hell actually happened when I was 4 or 5? And it was that penny drop moment where I was just Googling, and I started getting really scared because I was like, I don't actually know what happened to me down there. I've never really looked down there. I haven't seen what got taken from me. I don't know what they circumcised. And I do remember just being super, super ashamed of the fact that I had female circumcision attached to my name amongst my friends. You can be re-traumatized through certain questions that you might be asked by people, and I understand that there is no malice intended by certain questions. So like when people might ask, what does it look like, and like these are questions that can hinder someone's healing journey. And then the number of conversations that I had to have afterwards with my family members about why it happened. And it was really just a case where it was like, it's just the thing that happens. My mum would say, oh, it happened to me. And then she would say, but it happened to your grandmother as well. So it was just something that just occurred. I recall us really getting quite emotional about it, because I'm not the only one that's been through it, but I'm one of a long line of women in my family who have been through it. So I know that amongst the women in my family, there is this collective shared guilt, and I think a lot of blame at the start, because I'm like, why would you do that to me? But back then I didn't have the perspective that it was something that had also occurred to my mum and also occurred to my aunties and my grandmothers. I would say that it's an abusive act, but I wouldn't say that I would like to think that I'm a victim. I'd like to say that I'm more of a survivor of someone who was subjected to that, alongside every single woman in my family that was subjected to it as well. I don't think it was until I became 19 or 20 that I felt more comfortable about speaking out about my experiences, because then I had a vision that this was something that I want to put an end to. And it did end with my cohort of cousins. I know that there's definitely remorse, but I think it's also important to note that it's a collective trauma. So I don't feel like I was owed an apology. It's not our family or anyone's family that's the issue. It's the culture that it's entrenched in that's the issue. Me being born here meant that I had and have a lot of privilege when it comes to navigating certain spaces and speaking about things like this. I was the only one who was actually speaking out about it and wanting to put an end to that generational trauma that we were all carrying, but no one was talking about. And it became just this collective thing that every woman in my family wanted to do as well. So we all empowered each other through our experiences and made an active effort to actually open up the dialogue and remove the stigma and the shame that's attached to speaking out about it. When that law had been passed, that FGM is now criminalised in Sudan, it was like, okay, this is a step forward. I'm super, super proud of how far my family's come. We've been able to collectively come together as women and just empower each other in our experiences. And I feel like that's something that is a true blessing in my family. I know that there is an air of shame when it comes to speaking out about FGM in certain communities and in certain families. I just want to show women that there's a lot more of us out there that have been through it. And that if you feel like a space is safe enough to discuss these things, then do it.
Today I'm going to be talking about how I grew up in a cult. There was no TV in our house. We weren't allowed to watch movies or television shows. We weren't allowed to listen to any contemporary non-Christian music. I was not allowed to cut my hair. I was not allowed to wear makeup. I was not allowed to wear high heels. I felt like there were so many rules